Welcome, Vilash. Thanks so much for coming. I'm thinking it's going to be a great panel tonight. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what you guys do at Oyster.
Yeah, so Oyster is a digital bank for small and medium businesses. And we look at the business spread as anyone from a freelancer, digital native, who's self-employed to a startup and a very typical small and medium business. And our first market is Mexico.
Okay.
And then in the next few years, we want to go after the Spanish-speaking part of Latin America. So this involves Colombia, Peru, and Chile, right? But Mexico itself represents a significant portion of that Spanish-speaking Latin America. So outside of Brazil, it's one of the biggest markets. And it's a market that's desperately in need of a really good bank for businesses, an underserved need, in fact.
It was interesting. Yesterday, I posted, I'm always posting on Twitter, but an article about the unbanked, the race for people to serve the unbanked.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, I just got inundated with retweets and people commenting. And I think it was a Forbes article.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, gee, I post so many articles about FinTech and this one, for some reason, just got so much attention. What do you think's going on?
So I think there's two, right? I think the with the way the population is changing, I think the need for financial inclusion is accelerating at a much faster pace, right? And I think also for those who are already financially included, I think the need for them to have better digital services is actually also accelerating, right? I think businesses are realizing, and even consumers, that they need their banks, or they need their financial needs are at a much faster pace of adoption, right? Because they realize that there are new places that they want to go to, that the financial institutions or the current financial set of infrastructure hasn't been able to get them to in places where they need to get to in emerging markets, right? Which I think is a fantastic opportunity for entrepreneurship to thrive, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those very unique opportunities in emerging markets that I think is very different. And I think this is a very good opportunity for American entrepreneurs from Europe that we're seeing a lot in Mexico, where you can understand the pain points of having really, really good teams, but in a very fragmented market, right? So imagine the number of fintechs that are competing for a similar space in the US and in Europe.
Yeah.
And imagine that with what a very strong team can deliver in a market which doesn't have the competition, right? Yeah. So I think it's one of two things. I think there's a need to serve the underserved, and also to serve those who are just not properly served. Maybe underserved is not the right catch term for them. Yeah. They're served, but they probably are not, their needs are just barely met, right? And I think it's the opportunity in emerging markets to get to that market.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that explanation.
Yeah.
I was like, and it was still going this morning, and I'm like, gee, what happened there? Yeah. So can you tell me what the pain points are, particularly around credit, as far as the startup world goes?
Sure. So let's, I think, credit, I think, is fairly large, right? I think there's two broad areas. I think I think there's many different ways of classifying it. I'll probably classify it for simplicity into credit for consumers and credit for businesses, right? And I think these are very different sets and very different approaches, right? Of course, and I think largely in credit, you also have credit for well-developed markets and credit for probably not very well-developed markets or emerging markets, right? I think credit for developed markets in general, whether it be consumers or businesses, relies on fairly good infrastructure, like things like in the US, you have your social security number, you have your FICO scores, right? In the US, you also have business tax IDs that gives you a lot of relevant information to underwrite these businesses relatively well, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that be in the consumer or business space, I feel like the infrastructure lends a helping hand. Now, when you move into emerging markets, I think that all becomes really, really hard to get a handle of because there's not enough bureaus that report on the creditworthiness of consumers or the creditworthiness of businesses, right? So I think this is where you have the ability to really cause disruption, right? In terms of like pure fintech plays, the ability to look at unstructured data sets and make sense of them and underwrite consumers and businesses is where the biggest disruptions can be had, right? Whether that be in really, really big markets like India or markets in Southeast Asia or markets in Latin America. And this is also one of the reasons why you have big funds like SoftBank with a $5 billion fund investing heavily in credit in Latin America. And Mexico is the next big, people talk about why Mexico. Mexico is a really big market. Brazil has had a lot of like the early traction, but Mexico is a big underserved market. I'm sorry, I'm bringing it back. It's a market very close to my heart. Probably easy to give as an example, but I think it probably has many different parallels to other markets where the unstructured data sets and the ability to come in and make sense of them is where disruption and credit and fintech have a really good opportunity, right?
Fabulous. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
And what's the future looking like as far as your vision goes?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be more possible, and particularly when you're looking at these underserved markets?
So I think this is a very interesting space that we're in, right? On the one side, you have the speed of businesses growing quickly, consumers' needs changing quickly, right? But yet, when you look at credit and the way that credit is being brought to consumers and businesses, it's still, I think in many ways, we're trying to just say, can we give them very simple credit, right? And I think because I feel like the need is so high that, people are willing to take credit in any form or shape. But I think on the other hand, I think we're stopping short of getting to probably a better way of looking credit, right? Because really, when you look at how fast, like businesses and consumers have evolved, I think it's really getting to what form of credit do you need. For instance, I'll give you an example in businesses, right? A business could become healthy with many different forms of credit. You could have a traditional loan, you could have a credit card, and you could have factoring, which is a way of underwriting invoices to underwrite businesses to give them credit. And there's probably not one right answer. There's probably a right answer given the phase of businesses, right? And the way that we look at that opportunity where we are in Oyster is we want to be at the core of it, which is why we're creating a bank. Because when we can see the accounts payable and receivables of a business, we think it's almost like an operating system that we can see the ebbs and flows of a business so we can give them the right credit at the right time rather than credit which seems unilaterally being applied to a loan, which is probably not the best instrument to give to a business, because a loan in the wrong context essentially gives you what's called NPLs, non-performing loans, right? Because you just have loans that just don't know how to be used by a business, right? So I think there's a lot of like context of businesses that we can use to basically understand how credit is better placed right now, and this is where I think fintech also lends a hand, right? And that's the way that at least we see it at Oyster. And I think a lot of the next evolution would be around becoming smarter about the kind of credit we offer. And I think especially with the way that things are moving in the crypto space, there's also a big disruption there in terms of how cryptocurrency, lends with lending, right? I think the intersection of crypto and lending is very, very interesting. And I think that's, probably not the best person to answer where the intersection of crypto and lending is. But when you look at the arbitrage of what you can get from FX and crypto, that's a very interesting space when mixed with lending, right?
So what I'm hearing is that you guys are really being creative about this whole space, and it just means that people will have more options, and that sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. And really appreciate you coming to contribute to the panel.
Thank you for the opportunity and to speak here with very distinguished people on the panel. So thanks for the opportunity.
Wonderful.
And
thanks.
for organizing this panel as well.
Okay, thank you.